If you want to guarantee an athlete gets slower, well, there is one foolproof, totally universally applied method to do it. Just make them run sprints until they are completely, absolutely exhausted.
Yeah, that is pretty much the absolute worst thing you can do to a runner.
Right. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are looking through the stack of sources you sent us, specifically focusing on the International Youth Coaching Association's Longevity in Sports series.
It's a great series. A lot of really paradigm-shifting stuff in there.
Oh, totally. And our mission today is to basically dismantle the whole, no pain, no gain mentality when it comes to speed. Because as we dug into your research, it became incredibly clear that the traditional way we've all been taught to get faster is actually biologically destroying our speed.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the massive disconnect between what we assume builds speed and what the human body actually demands to produce it. I mean, the standard operating procedure for decades has been to try and force speed through sheer volume.
All right, like a coach sees a slow athlete and just thinks, well, they need to run more.
Exactly. But the human nervous system outright rejects that approach. True speed, it's not a feature you can just download or, an accessory you can bolt onto an athlete during a 6-week summer boot camp.
Yeah, you can just hack it.
No, not at all. It requires a highly layered chronological approach that takes years to build.
And we're going to map out that exact chronological timeline today, from early childhood all the way through those late teen years. But before we get into the timeline, we have to establish a baseline.
Right, we need to define the terms.
Exactly. The research insists that the whole coaching collapse starts because people don't actually understand what speed is. So biologically speaking, what are the components of moving fast? Right? It's not just moving your legs quicker, right?
Far from it. Speed relies on 3 non-negotiable pillars. If you picture a stool with 3 legs, missing even one means the whole thing falls over.
Okay, so what's leg number 1?
First, you need the ability to produce force. That is pure, raw strength.
Just pure muscle strength.
Got it. Right. Second, you need the ability to apply that force incredibly quickly. That is power. Now, force and power are related, but they are definitely not the same thing.
Wait, how are they different? I think a lot of people use those interchangeably.
Well, you can be strong enough to squat a massive amount of weight slowly, right? But if you can't express that force in a fraction of a second, you won't be fast. Power is force plus time.
Oh, I see. So the speed of the force matters just as much as the strength itself.
Exactly. And third, you need the ability to move efficiently so that the force actually propels you in the intended direction. That is your mechanics.
So strength, power, and mechanics.
Oh, yeah.
It makes sense that if a runner has sloppy mechanics, all that raw strength just, bleeds out into the ground.
Exactly. They're working super hard, but they aren't going anywhere fast.
Which leads us directly into the ultimate misconception that ruins athletes across all age groups. It is the persistent, just stubborn habit of confusing speed training with conditioning.
Yes. We have this deep-seated cultural belief that if an athlete isn't exhausted, panting, sweating profusely, the workout simply wasn't effective.
Yeah, if you aren't hurting, you aren't working.
Right. So coaches program these massive volumes of sprints, assuming more work yields a faster athlete.
I've seen that on 100 different fields. A coach blowing a whistle, making kids run wind sprints at the end of practice when they can barely even stand up. I assume the thought process is that they're at least building endurance for the game.
That is the assumption, yeah. But neurologically, something very destructive is happening there. When an athlete pushes into physical fatigue during sprint work, their central nervous system essentially begins to dim the lights.
Dim the lights, what do you mean?
Well, their ability to recruit motor units drops significantly.
Wait, pause right there. Motor units? I think I know what that implies, but break it down for me like I'm 5. What exactly is a motor unit, and why do we care if we're recruiting them?
Okay, so think of a motor unit as a single switchboard operator in your brain connected to a specific bundle of muscle fibers. When you want to move, the brain sends an electrical signal down the nerve to that operator, telling those muscle fibers to contract.
Okay, tracking with you so far.
To achieve maximum speed, your brain needs to recruit every available motor unit simultaneously and fire them at the highest possible frequency. But as fatigue sets in, the brain literally cannot send those signals as fast or as strongly.
Oh, wow. So the operators just get sluggish.
Exactly. Your force output just plummets.
So you are physically incapable of practicing your top speed when you're tired.
Right. And it gets worse than just being slow in the moment. Fatigue heavily degrades your coordination.
Yeah.
The athlete starts moving with sloppy, inefficient mechanics.
Like their form breaks down.
Completely. Their hips drop, their foot strike gets heavy, their arm swing gets super wide. And because the nervous system is highly adaptive, every single time they run with those sloppy mechanics, they are permanently reinforcing bad habits.
Huh.
Yeah, they are literally training their brain and body to be slow and inefficient.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this completely flips the traditional sports mentality on its head. Think about it like trying to learn a blisteringly fast, highly complex piano solo.
That's a great analogy.
Right. You are sitting at the keys, you're practicing, and after an hour of intense focus, your hands start cramping. Your forearms are totally exhausted, your fingers are slipping and hitting the wrong keys.
And you just keep going.
Exactly. The traditional sports mentality says, push through the burn, keep practicing. But if you keep playing that solo while your hands are fatigued and fumbling, you aren't getting better at the song. You are just hardwiring those mistakes into your brain.
Yeah, you are actively practicing being bad at it. You are myelinating the wrong neural pathways.
Okay, another big word, myelinating. What is happening in the brain there?
So myelin is like the plastic insulation wrapped around a copper electrical wire. In your nervous system, myelin wraps around your nerve fibers. The more you practice a specific movement, the more myelin gets wrapped around that specific neural pathway.
Oh, so it insulates the signal so it travels better.
Exactly. It allows the electrical signal to travel much faster and more efficiently. It's how a movement becomes automatic. If you practice a piano solo perfectly, you insulate the perfect pathway.
But the body doesn't know the difference between good and bad practice, does it?
Nope. Your body doesn't judge whether a movement is good or bad. It just insulates whatever you do most often. So if you practice while exhausted, with terrible, sloppy mechanics, your body dutifully insulates those sloppy pathways.
So exhaustion is the literal enemy of speed development. You're just myelinating poor form.
That is the biological reality. In speed training, a core rule is that if an athlete looks tired, or if their form is visibly breaking down, the session has already lost its purpose. True speed training requires maximum intent, hyperfocus, and near-complete recovery between repetitions. You simply cannot practice moving at maximum velocity if your nervous system is too exhausted to actually reach maximum velocity.
That is wild. But okay, if grinding it out actually destroys speed, then the way we introduce sports to kids from day one has to come from a completely different philosophy. Which brings us to the actual chronological map of building an athlete, starting with ages 6 to 12.
Right, the early years.
And based on what you're saying, I'm guessing we don't start them with highly structured, perfectly timed sprint intervals.
No, we avoid that entirely. From ages 6 to 9, we are in the phase of laying foundational groundwork. Speed development at this stage must be what the source material explicitly calls invisible.
Invisible, like they don't even know they're training.
Exactly. If a coach has a group of 7-year-olds lined up in perfectly measured lanes, blowing a whistle and drilling formal sprint mechanics, they are actively working against the child's biology.
Hold on, I have to jump in here and play the role of the crazy, overeager sports parent. Because you see this everywhere now. There's a whole cottage industry built around this.
Oh, definitely. The youth sprint camps.
Yeah. If I have an 8-year-old who wants to be fast, and I want to give him an edge, you're telling me that signing them up for a formal sprint mechanics camp is useless? Like, I should literally just tell them to go to the park and play tag.
I am telling you that playing tag is a biologically superior training method for an 8-year-old.
Wait, really? Just tag?
Honestly, yes. At ages 6 to 9, the biological priority is not building muscle cross-section or perfecting joint angles. The priority is driving neurological development through exploration.
Okay, so how does tag do that better than a drill?
Think about the chaos of a game of tag. The child's brain is being forced to subconsciously calculate spatial awareness, rapid deceleration, acceleration, and unpredictable changes of direction. They are building coordination, balance, and rhythm naturally.
Because they aren't overthinking it. They're just trying not to get tagged. Their brain is solving the problem of movement organically.
Exactly. The central nervous system learns rhythm best through unstructured play. Overcoaching at this stage, like a coach constantly yelling cues at a kid about their knee drive or their arm swing, it actually causes the child to internalize their focus.
They get in their own head.
Right, they start thinking about their limbs instead of the objective. They become stiff, robotic, and ultimately slower. The primary goal at this age is pure exposure to movement and enjoyment.
So play is the actual work. But then, obviously, kids grew up and their bodies change. The source material highlights a critical transition that happens between ages 10 and 12. They call it the skill window. Why does the methodology shift here?
Well, between ages 10 and 12, the neurological system matures to a point where athletes become incredibly capable of learning and refining specific, complex movement patterns.
So they can actually process the coaching cues now.
Yeah. Exactly. They have the attention span and the body awareness to understand those cues. This is where we can start to be much more intentional with our speed training. But it still must be approached strictly as skill development, absolutely not as conditioning.
Keep the exhaustion far away from the mechanics.
Always. This is the window where sprint mechanics begin to take a formal shape. We introduce drills that reinforce tall posture, proper arm action, and bodily synchronization.
Are they actually sprinting at this age?
Yes, but we pair those drills with very short, high-quality sprint efforts. We are talking 10 or 15 meters maximum. It is also the perfect time to introduce basic plyometrics like simple pogo jumps or box jumps, alongside foundational bodyweight strength training.
But just to be clear, based on the research, we aren't trying to build bulky, powerful athletes at age 11, right? We're not throwing them under heavy barbells to build force.
No, not at all. The goal of strength training at this particular age isn't heavy force production, it is physical control. We are teaching their nervous system how to organize their bodies against gravity.
Building the foundation.
Right. Athletes who learn how to move with precision, who learn how to land softly and stabilize their joints during this 10 to 12 skill window, provide themselves with a massive advantage later in life.
Because things are about to get a lot more complicated. If play builds the baseline and ages 10 to 12 refine the skill, what happens when puberty hits?
That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, we are moving into ages 13 to 18, which the sources suggest is the most dangerous intersection for athlete development. Kids suddenly gain 20 pounds of muscle, their hormones are surging, and the stakes get way higher. Does the no fatigue rule still apply?
It applies more than ever, yet this is the exact moment where developmental programs historically derail. From ages 13 to 15, we enter the building the engine phase.
Building the engine. Okay.
Yeah, athletes are growing rapidly, their muscle cross-sectional area is increasing, and they are gaining natural strength.
Just to clarify, when you say cross-sectional area, we're just talking about muscles getting physically thicker and denser,
Yeah.
right? Puberty hitting.
That is the practical outcome, yes. Hormones are driving muscle hypertrophy. And the massive mistake coaches make here is looking at these bigger, stronger bodies and thinking, okay, playtime is over. Now it is time for the grueling, fatigue-based conditioning.
Oh, because they look like adults, coaches treat them like adults.
Exactly. They abandon the skill work just when it becomes most critical. Instead, the focus during these early teen years must aggressively shift toward progressive strength training and advanced plyometrics. We are taking that new natural strength and teaching the nervous system how to translate it into explosive power.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we think about this ages 13 to 15 window, it is basically like putting a massive supercharged V8 engine into a car.
Ooh, I like that.
Because at puberty, they suddenly have all this horsepower that they didn't have a year ago. But if the alignment of the car, meaning the movement mechanics, is off, driving faster doesn't mean you win the race. It just means you are going to crash harder and do more damage to the frame.
The biomechanical reality of that analogy is spot on. When a 14-year-old suddenly has the muscle mass to produce significantly more force, the stress on their bones, tendons, and joints increases exponentially.
Makes sense. More force equals more impact.
Right. That is precisely why the source material stresses that while acceleration, max velocity sprinting, and resisted sprints are introduced here, mechanics remain paramount. As speed and force increase, any underlying movement flaws become violently pronounced.
So if a kid has a mechanical asymmetry, say their left hip drops every time they strike the ground, and we just keep adding force to it without correcting it, we're just asking for an injury.
You are locking in an inefficient, injury-prone pattern at a much higher intensity. Done well, this phase sets the stage for elite performance by teaching the body to handle its new engine.
And done poorly.
Done poorly, you create deep-rooted neurological limitations and joint stress that are incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible to undo later in their career.
That is a terrifying thought for any coach. So if we manage to navigate the V8 engine phase without crashing the car, we arrive at the final stage of youth development.
Yeah.
Ages 16 to 18. The maximizing output phase. How does the day-to-day training look different for an older teenager?
The paradigm shifts from development to optimization. These older teenagers are now fully capable of producing immense levels of force and power. The sprint work here becomes intensely precise and highly intentional.
Okay.
And because the physical outputs are so high, the requirement for full recovery between efforts becomes an absolute non-negotiable rule.
This is the part of the research that I think messes with people's heads the most. The idea of an athlete doing a maximum effort sprint for maybe 4 or 5 seconds and then standing around doing absolutely nothing for 4 or 5 minutes.
Right.
To a traditional coach or a parent watching from the bleachers, that looks incredibly lazy.
It looks lazy, but it is biologically imperative. When you run at maximum velocity, your nervous system is firing at its absolute peak, and your muscles are burning through a very specific, fast-acting energy source called ATP-CP.
Okay, ATP-CP, that sounds intense.
It is, and that energy system depletes in a matter of seconds. It takes roughly 3 to 5 minutes of complete rest for the body to clear the metabolic waste and fully replenish that energy source so the nervous system can fire at 100% capacity again.
So if you only rest for 60 seconds, you might feel like you're working harder, but you're actually only running at maybe 90% capacity on the next sprint.
Exactly. And 90% capacity does not trigger the biological adaptations required to increase your top speed. At this elite level, fatigue management is the entire game.
Wow.
Yeah, the margin for improvement is razor thin, and the cost of poor fatigue training is an immediate drop in movement quality. The source material frames this beautifully. At this level, doing less but doing it better is the key to maintaining the efficiency that true speed depends on.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed from the chaotic, subconscious spatial calculations of playing tag at age 7 all the way to the meticulous precision of fully recovered max velocity sprints at age 18.
It's quite the evolution.
It really is. It proves that speed isn't a hack. It's not something you can just force upon a body. It is the natural, inevitable reward of properly layered strength, power, and mechanics over years of patience.
It requires an enormous amount of discipline from both the coach and the athlete. The best programs resist the urge to rush. They prioritize absolute quality over mindless quantity.
They just let the process happen.
Right. They respect the biological realities of the human body at every distinct stage of its growth rather than fighting against them.
And I want to connect this directly to you, the listener, because whether you are coaching a youth soccer team, whether you are trying to navigate your own kid's athletic journey, or honestly, whether you are just evaluating your own personal routine in the gym, this information completely shatters and rebuilds the definition of a good workout.
It absolutely forces us to step back and evaluate our metrics for success.
Yes, we need to stop equating pools of sweat and total exhaustion with progress. Because as we've learned, sweat and exhaustion are not the metrics for speed. Precision, intent, and freshness are.
Exactly.
The ultimate question you should be asking isn't, are we doing enough speed work? Or are we working hard enough? The question is, are we doing the right speed work at the right time in the right way?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this philosophy extends far beyond just running fast on a track. What we are really talking about is the neurology of learning.
That's a great point.
The source material demonstrates unequivocally that pushing through central nervous system fatigue literally hardwires bad habits into the body. It degrades the architecture of the skill by insulating the wrong neural pathways.
The myelinating we talked about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long-term development of any complex skill demands patience and a deep honoring of how the brain actually encodes information.
And that actually leaves me with a really provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up today. The sources make it emphatically clear. Fatigue slows the nervous system and ruins the learning of complex physical mechanics.
It's undeniable.
Right. You practice sloppy, your brain myelinates sloppy pathways, and you become permanently sloppy. But it makes you wonder, where else in our lives are we making this exact same mistake?
Oh, that's interesting.
Where else are we mistaking exhaustion for progress? Think about cognitive skills. If pushing through physical fatigue hardwires bad athletic habits, how many cognitive skills, like trying to learn a new language late at night or practicing a musical instrument until your eyes blur, how many of those are we accidentally sabotaging?
Just by trying to do too much.
Exactly.
Oh.
Even trying to solve complex logistical problems at work after a 10-hour shift. Are we literally training our brains to be slower, less creative, and less efficient by grinding it out when our nervous system is already too tired to learn?
It's a really good question to ask ourselves.
Maybe clicking that stopwatch and seeing a fast time isn't a measurement of how hard you suffered today. Maybe it is a measurement of how smart you were over the last 5 years. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. This has been your personal deep dive into the science of speed. We'll catch you on the next one.